So I had a breakdown at one point 6 or 7 years ago. I realized my kids didn't like me. So Monday mornings, my kids would start to avoid me.
Welcome to Fatherhood Voices, breaking the toxic cycle. Dive in as real dads bear all, the mess ups, make ups, and every heartfelt moment in between. It's raw, it's
Welcome to
real,
another
and it might
episode
just
of
change the way
Fatherhood
you see
Voices.
family.
Now, I'm excited today to have Locke Haman on. And reason I'm excited is because not only does he have 4 children of his own, but also his journey of how he didn't show up for his kids and how he was able to make that correction. And now he's showing up as a coach, as a coach to other fathers, fitness. And there's a line that he has on his Instagram, a profile page that really stood out. And I just want to read it. And it says, helping men become the hero in their family story. And man, that just hit me, because, when we think about that school assignment in school, when teachers want you to name who their hero is. And sometimes it's mom and dad, sometimes it's not. But just that statement of teaching men become the hero in their family story, I think is beautiful. So, welcome, Locke. And I'm excited to hear your story. And yeah, you can introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share. I always love talking about this stuff because it was conversations like this, being a fly on the wall, getting to listen to conversations like we're about to have that helped me so much in my journey, as you said, to become the hero in my family story
Mhm.
instead of the villain, which is what I was. And you and I were chatting before we pressed record about, how much you can relate to that. So I'm sure we're going to go deep on that. As you said, my name's Locke Haman. I'm a men's coach and a men's group facilitator. And what that means is I could go on and on about what that means. But in a nutshell, I help men change their lives instead of being the villain to become the hero in their family story. And I do it from using everything I learned from screwing things up in my life. And I'm more than willing to share a lot of those things I've screwed up, a lot of my journey. I'm sure we'll get into that. I'll save that for later right now, but just the idea, like everything I learned, everything I share, everything I coach and teach on is from experience. And I think that's incredibly powerful. I'm not just a talking head saying, oh, here's what you should do because I read it in a book once. It's like, here's what you should do because maybe I did read it in a book and that's how I had to learn it. But also, I know that it works and it works better than the alternative. And, that line that you quoted from my Instagram bio, it comes from this question that I don't remember where I heard it first, but it was a haunting question. And it was, are you the hero in your family's journey or are you the villain? And I realized at the time that I heard that if my life was like a movie, metaphorically, like if you're in a movie theater and or you're flipping channels and you plop down in the middle of this movie and it's my life and it's my family and you're the bystander, you know nothing about what's gone on so far, you just come into my life right now, would you be rooting for me? And when I thought about that, I was like, oh, no one, no one from the outside looking in would be cheering for me. I would be the villain. They would be cheering for me to leave, to get kicked off the show, to be voted off the island, to, for my wife to leave me like she was ready to do. And so that was a really painful realization. And it stuck with me all through my journey over the years of turning this around. And so in a nutshell, that's what I help other men do, whether it's through one-on-one coaching or whether it's through getting into a group of other like-minded men who are looking to grow as men, as husbands, as fathers, who are willing to share their mistakes, receive constructive criticism, be held accountable, once in a while get a kick in the butt. That's what I do. I run these groups and I do coaching. And I kind of stumbled into that, believe it or not, which is part of my story. But I stumbled into it through having to find a men's group for myself and discovering the power of a men's group and something I'd never experienced before in my life, which was the power of brotherly love. We'll call it, which brotherly love to me is um, love, but not being afraid to give each other a kick in the pants and say, hey, I know you, and not you're a piece of crap because you're screwing this up. It's no, Edward, I know you can do better. Show me that you can do better, and let me help you do better. And the power of that in my life led me down this road into becoming a coach and a men's group leader myself. So I'll leave it at that. I'll let you pick that apart however you want. Ask me whatever questions. I'm an open book, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that resonates, that really stuck out, is I put out a post right before the 4th of July, and a couple of different posts I've done in the past, but just talking about how men, we get together for these holiday events, for these barbecues, and, you get together and then you want to sit there and you want to talk about sports and work and women, just all kinds of stuff. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but we don't dive into the deeper. We talk surface level, and then we don't talk about the struggles as fathers, as husbands, as in relationships. And then you hear somebody goes and commits suicide, and you're like, my gosh, I just talked to them a couple of weeks ago. Why didn't they just let me know they were struggling? But it's because as men, we live with these social expectations that we have to be strong and we have to be dominant, and we can't be emotional. We can't provide a safe container. So just share. I love that you're doing that, because that's one of my constant pitches is guys, like it's cool to have the guy talk, but fuck, man, let's talk about like real problems. Let's talk about like, how am I struggling with my kids? My daughter says she hates me. Like, what experience have you guys had? And we have to be able to create. It's almost like somebody has to be man enough to open up that door and say, hey, let's have real talk. And that takes courage right there.
It does. And I'll tell you, I'll share just a tiny bit of my journey exactly proving that point. And, before I do that, you said something about suicides. There's a statistic out there, and I'm going to kind of round up probably, but men make up 50% of the population. But the last I saw, men make up 80% of the suicides. And so like, we don't want anybody to commit suicide, right? But where does that come from? And I think that there's a connection to this idea, this conditioning. There's so many voices out there right now, and a lot of so one of the consistent conversations that we have in our men's groups is, marriage, feminine, masculine dynamic, what's going on with our guys and their wives. A lot of wives are saying, hey, you need to be a little more vulnerable, right? But we're conditioned. We're told we need to be vulnerable, but we're also conditioned and looked at as weaker when we have emotions. And the reality is, so many guys that come to me, they say, oh, I don't need a men's group because I don't need to sit around talking about my problems. That's not productive. It's like, well, the difference is we're not sitting around talking about our problems and then going back to our day. We're sitting around talking about our problems and then doing something about it. And the difference for men is, it's not bad or weaker to talk about your problems. It's weak when you talk about your problems and you do nothing different. It's actually strength when you say, this is what I'm struggling with, and I want to take action, but I have no clue what to do. What should I do? What would you guys do? What have you done? And that was a turning point in my growth when I had a breakdown at one point 6 or 7 years ago. I realized my kids didn't like me. So Monday mornings, my kids would start to avoid me. I owned and ran a real estate brokerage at the time, and I was burnt out. And like, they were young enough that they didn't get it, but they knew Monday mornings suck. Stay away from dad. And I put 2 and 2 together. A day or two later, after that realization, full of guilt about that, not knowing what to do, my wife says, I don't think you're the man that I married. I don't want to be married to you anymore. And we have a history of fighting. And so she had said things like that in a moment of emotion before, but she was cool and calm when she said it that time. And that just blew my mind. And then a couple of days later, I realized how I had an incident happen that made me realize how deep. It wasn't that I didn't have self-love. It wasn't that I didn't like myself. I was actually addicted to a lifetime addiction of self-hatred. And from my earliest memories. And so like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, these 3 realizations in 1 week, and I had a breakdown. And as I'm trying to climb out of this hole I've fallen into, I was motivated to make a change. Like you said, the pain, right? But I was full of shame in other men seeing how broken I was. And so what I tried to do was I tried to do it all by myself. I bought all kinds of books. I listened to all kinds of podcasts. Once in a while, I'd buy a course, but it was all nameless and faceless, right? Nobody was allowed to see how broken I was. And I made a lot of progress. I did grow, but I reached a ceiling. And every man is going to realize this. You can grow on your own. You can, what I call lone wolfing it, right? But at a certain point, I stopped growing because what I really needed was other men in my life. I needed to see that other men had similar struggles because I thought I was an extra special kind of screwed up and nobody else had my problems, pity party kind of thing. And I needed to see that other men could still accept and respect me as I healed and grew and fixed this stuff. And it wasn't until I opened up in coaching in men's groups, I was no longer anonymous. I couldn't hide my identity, right? It was only when I started to admit my flaws to other men that I realized, yep, my problems aren't that special. Other people are struggling too. What that means is I can fix it just as easily as they can fix it. And I started to realize the power of brothers who weren't going to take my shit, weren't going to take my bad excuses, but they were going to give me a kick in the pants with love. Instead of the shame that I was holding for myself, they weren't going to shame me. And so I think that's what's missing for most men, whether it's a single person, a single friend to have these deep conversations with, or a group of friends, or a group online, or a church group, or whatever it is, to have these real conversations. You can still drink beer and talk about sports, but sometimes you need to go deep on what you're struggling with. And if you can't, that's where we get into that lopsided statistic of 50% of the population, 80% of the suicides. It's all bottled up and shoved down till it comes out in another way.
I love the way that you put this into context. And I'm going to even take it a step further and say, this is going to be a lot easier to digest for entrepreneurs. So you come from real estate, we have mastermind groups and coaching and role play.
Yeah.
But we think about what about the people that aren't exposed to these coaching programs for sales and for leads and so forth. So I'm just going to say to you men out there that have never been in business, know that as entrepreneurs, we seek out groups, we seek out mastermind groups. It's similar to like what you're talking about, and we learn about objections and taking no and we learn techniques and we learn how people are having successes and how they're having failures, and that's in business. And it's so weird to see that we're so quick to accept that criticism, so to speak, from men when it has to do with a business environment, but yet we don't want to take it when something more important than business, and that's your family, that's your kids. So just a shout out to the men that are going like, this stuff isn't for me. No, high level achievers, they seek out coaches, they seek out mastermind groups, and it's like you said, yes, you can digest all the training and books and so forth, but until you have that accountability in place from other men that are going to call you on your shit, then that's when the real growth starts. And it's almost like learning the best practices from their stories. Like you said, I'm not alone. Like, man, I thought I fucked things up, but you like really messed it up. Like, thank you for making me feel better. But it happens whenever we think, we feel like alone and we're the only ones that are messing things up. Man, there's a lot more people that mess things up a lot worse, So
absolutely,
a little bit of,
I love that. I love the sales analogy. I always love this phrase: if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? So if you're the best dad in your group of friends, you got to up your friend game. If you're the best husband in the guys you're hanging out with, you got to hang out with some better husbands. Think of kids' sports, right? So I have a son and 3 daughters, and my son, I have regularly put him into playing up a level or up in age. You don't want to play your kid down in age so that he's playing with easier competition. Yeah, that'd probably be good for his confidence for a little while, but it's not going to develop his game or her game at all. You want your kids playing up a level, and it's the same thing for ourselves. We want guys around us who are going to make us better, who are going to make us smarter, who are going to push us to be better. whether that's sports, whether that's fatherhood, whether that's being a husband, whether that's at work, or like you said, in sales. I think that's a great analogy.
It's funny that you touched on this topic because I just did an IG live this morning about how adults bully children.
Mm,
When you bring up sports, that's very powerful because one of the things I talked about is parents, you have to vet the coaches. You have to make sure that the coaches are in it for the right reason, and they're not just there to win to project their ego that's lacking because maybe they didn't win as a child. But because I use the example of throwing my daughter into sports, and it was a bad coach, and instead he broke her down. And you know what
yeah.
happened midway through? She shut down and never got back into sports. But I didn't recognize it at the time because it's like, oh, she's just being weak. Like he's just trying to instill, her to be stronger. But the power of, we're sitting here talking about ourselves as fathers and how we show up. But what about when we allow these strangers, it's coaches, it's teachers, and I'm going to take it one step further and even say it's your fucking relatives that body
Mm,
shame kids, that embarrass them when they're not comfortable, or when you force them to hug them and they're not comfortable. So we have to
yeah.
be conscientious of that too. So as we're growing, we also have to remember that it's these outside influences that we allow in that we have to be careful with because
Yeah.
it can be damaging. You
Absolutely. Let me share a concept that I've been thinking about a lot lately on that exact topic, because and we can relate it to all kinds of different things, but it's this idea that, like, oh, it's coming from everywhere. That's almost overwhelming, right? Like, how do I vet the coach and the teacher and the bus driver and all the people they're hanging out with? And to a certain extent you can't. As to your point, sometimes we need to, but we're never going to be able to completely protect our kids 100% of the time. It's like, I think of, this may be, I don't know how old the people listening to this are, but I think it was Little Giants, the movie Little Giants, where they wrap the kid up in like bubble wrap before he goes out on the football field, right? We can't do that metaphorically for our kids. But so I've been thinking about this idea, and it's bodyguard versus teacher. And think about our role as a father. So when we think of fatherhood, one of the first things we go to is like protector and provider, right? And let's set aside provider just for a second, but the idea of protector, we're supposed to protect our kids. To your point, the IG live you did earlier, a lot of dads are their kids' first bullies and not protectors, right? So when we look at our role as protector, we want to rush in and save them from every situation we possibly can. And sometimes that can be too much, like helicopter parenting almost. The problem is eventually our kids are going to leave us. They're going to grow up, and we're not going to be there to protect them anymore. Or, as you're just saying, when we're talking about like all of these sources that we need to watch out for, we absolutely do, but we can't possibly stay on top of all of them. And so there's going to be something that slips through the cracks we're not going to be able to protect them with. And so I've started to think more of myself as a teacher. And I would urge everybody listening to kind of philosophically think through this. There are times where we need to allow our kids to be hurt emotionally or a little bit physically. Climb that rock wall, because if you fall down, you're only 2 steps up. You're not, the top of a jungle gym trying to fly. You're not going to break your neck. You might get a bruise or cut your leg. And I've always wanted to be like, no, get down. I don't want to deal with a screaming child. Get down. No fun. Fun, please, is here. But sometimes we need to let them get hurt. And I was talking with a friend about this, about basketball. So I coached my son's basketball team. This other one of his friends was on the basketball team. And I was talking to his dad about this. And sometimes our kids need to get their butts kicked. And maybe our kids are getting trash talked too. And instead of going over to the ref or to the other coach or to that kid's parent and saying, knock it off, go tell your kid. Sometimes the lesson is teacher instead of bodyguard, right? We're not a bouncer outside a club. Sometimes what we need to do is we need to teach around this, because this is a life situation. We as adults, we might have to deal with bullies as adults. So what do you do when somebody's talking trash to you? And it was a really interesting conversation to have with my son. He's like, trash talking comes from their insecurity. So keep that in mind. the best thing you can do to somebody trash talking is actually laugh at them, because that's the exact opposite of what they want, or just ignore them, right? And so it leads to these teaching moments, teacher instead of bodyguard. So, if you look at certain situations, I think that you can set your kids up for when you're not around. Now they know how to handle this. And then there are times where it's like, yeah, there's a car coming and you're running across the road. I'm going to bodyguard this and I'm going to yank you out of the way for sure. But, teacher versus bodyguard, it's one that's been, kind of rolling around in my head for a little while.
No, I love that. And one of the things that, I had shared also was educating them on when someone's crossed the line, when
Yeah.
it's just not
Yeah.
competitive and it's crossed the line to it's just, plain bullying, where it's causing emotional or even
Yeah.
psychological, and giving them that safe space to be able to go and talk to you about it and not feel like you're going to shut them down. Because I was one that I would shut my girls down and just like, you need to suck it up, this is how life is. And so it's trying to find that balance. And I guess that's the difficult thing is trying to come up with something where, yes, you want them to struggle a little bit because you want them to prevail in the end, but at the same
Yeah.
time is you don't want them emotionally, or psychologically abused, which happens quite often, as I'm
Absolutely.
starting to realize.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well said.
So your story. So you grew up. Now, where'd you grow up at?
So I born and grew up in Massachusetts, currently in New Hampshire, but always kind of lived in this New England area. And yeah, you had asked before we were talking about my childhood. It's interesting because my childhood, there was not anything that I can point to big, like we call it big T trauma. Like there was not any big T trauma that I can point to that would explain away my condition in my late 20s, where I told that story about my breakdown. And I struggled with this fact for a long time because my wife, um, her childhood, there was all kinds of big T trauma. And she's unraveling that. We've gone on this healing journey together, where we've been growing for years together. Sometimes her faster, sometimes me faster, sometimes at the same speed. And I'm watching her peel back layer after layer of this big T trauma and all the things that happened to her. And I, for a little while, felt some guilt. And I'm like, well, what the hell's wrong with me? I don't have any of that stuff. Like, my parents are still together. Certainly not perfect, but I had a very innocent childhood, very almost like secluded and sheltered. And I don't have any of this. So what like, how am I so screwed up? And it's led me to this realization that, yeah, big T trauma is bad, right? Like some stuff that I've heard from other people, it's scary to think that can happen. But a lifetime of little T trauma, so a lifetime of feeling shame, or like I shared, this, my addiction to self-hatred. So hating my name, hating my haircut, hating the hand-me-down clothes that I had to wear, hating this, hating that, became a story of I hate myself. And a lifetime of telling that story can add up, and it can put you into this corner where you're really, it's not that it's unfixable, but you can really screw yourself up without needing a series of big T traumatic events happening to you. And in a nutshell, that was my life. It wasn't people doing mean things to me. It was the way I was talking to myself for 25, 26, 27 years that led me into the pit of that hole that I found myself in.
And so it all comes to a point where you have this breakdown, and it all just came at in one moment, just over the course of a week. It's just okay.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? So a father's going through, now you have this breakdown. What helped you to start the process to rebuild? What did the journey look like? Because I'm sure there's a lot of fathers out there that are going to relate and go like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm at that point now where I'm about to have this meltdown. How one is how maybe could have it been avoided, if it could have been avoided?
Good question.
And then the next one was that journey to self-discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll tackle the could it have been avoided first, because this is something I've talked with my wife about. And obviously I've turned it around. We've turned our relationship around. Certainly not perfect, but in a better place than we've ever been now. And she felt a lot of guilt for a long time because she saw it coming. She saw my breakdown coming. She saw my burnout in my career coming. She obviously saw how I treated my kids and her. And she had a little bit of a glimpse into how I treated myself too. And she felt guilty for a while because she tried to tell me. She warned me many times. But the reality is, and luckily I've had this conversation with her many times. She gets it now. In the moment, it was really hard. But the reality is I needed to break. I needed to feel that pain as deeply as I felt it to make the changes I needed to make. And so I put a video out recently on Instagram about this. It's a Japanese art called kintsugi. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's when back probably hundreds, thousands of years ago, when material was scarce and a piece of pottery broke, they would glue it back together. They would try and fix it. And eventually this art form, and I'm probably screwing up the telling of the story. That's okay, because the meaning is still here. Eventually they started covering these cracks or even using as the glue, they started using gold. And so they have these beautiful pieces of art, a bowl that's been shattered into pieces, but has been repaired with gold.
Wow.
And so in the end, the flaws are actually what makes it valuable.
Wow.
And this was what happened to me. I just didn't realize it. The flaws in my life were necessary because two reasons. I needed to feel the pain of breaking completely in order to make the necessary changes. And the second, those flaws were what I needed to use to then help other men in my situation. And the flaws in your life. So if another guy is in this situation, or a girl, if you're in this situation, the flaws in your life, the cracks, if you want to continue this metaphor, are what is going to make you more valuable. You just need to see the gold. So if you have an absentee father or an abusive father or whatever it was, that horrible role model, that mistreatment that you experienced at the hands of your father is going to make you into a better father, because you're going to try and do the opposite. That bad breakup, that failed marriage, the divorce that rocked your world, whatever it is, that's going to set you up for finding deeper love and connection in the next relationship. You just have to let it. You have to see it from that framework. And so I needed to see it from that framework. I had about 24 hours of, I have no clue what I'm going to do here. And through a weird series of situations, I had just ordered the day before. So that the day I finally had my breakdown was a Sunday. The day before, I had a book delivered from Amazon, and it was called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It, by I think it's Kamal Ravikant. His brother is Naval. They're both brilliant. It's short. It's probably like 60 pages, big font. And I had read it all in one day, the day before I had this breakdown. And in the midst of this, probably not even 24 hours of just helplessness, I have no clue what I'm going to do here, it clicked. That's the first step. Do what he talks about in that book. And the one thing, one thing that still sticks in my mind from that book is his idea, and I'm sure it's not originally his idea, but the idea that like we play thoughts on repeat, and I think something like 80% of the thoughts we have something like 60. I'm not exact on these numbers, but I think we have like 60,000 thoughts per day. 80% of them are negative. And so what's the math on that? Like 48,000 negative thoughts a day. It's crazy. And so his message, and he said it much more eloquently than I will, but he said, okay, replace those negative thoughts with one positive one. And specifically, I love myself. And it sounds like hokey. And if you're on the beginning of your journey and you're like, okay, nope, not doing that. Okay, whatever. Somebody is at a certain point in their life, they need to hear this. I love myself. I love myself. I love myself. I used to walk around the house saying that until his idea is make that be the most common thought in your head. And for me, that was exactly what I needed. Maybe other people are in different situations and in different holes, but for me, a lifetime addiction of self-hatred, I needed to reprogram that thought. And it was like this book was sent to me somehow, decided to buy it, came the day before, read it in one sitting, and then boom, the next day I break down. And so it was a weird series of events. I mean, my entire life has been like that, but that was how I started to turn it around. And I would say that, you know, if you're in that situation, the other thing that clicked for me is ultimately I knew in the end there was absolutely no way I was going to give up on my kids. And like people say that it's a terrible thing to stay in a relationship for your kids. I didn't stay in my relationship for my kids. I just knew that even at the bottom of that hole, like there was no way I was going to give up on them. And so that removed the possibility of there not being an answer. It was like, there has to be an answer. I need to find it. Great. Here's the first step from the book. Now, where are the rest of the answers? And I had been in my real estate career, I've been pretty successful from the outside looking in monetarily, you know, success wise in real estate. I'd always been success minded, looking at self development, but it was always externally focused. How do I make more money? How do I close more sales? How do I get in better shape? And at that point, the book and the one major habit that I took from that right away, it forced me to take that self-development mindset and just turn it in. Instead of more money, bigger house, more success, external, it turned it in and it said, okay, how do we pick up this shattered bowl that's inside of you, right? How do we clean up this mess? And I'll be honest with you guys, it was a long journey. It was a long process out of that, and I'm nowhere near done. But ultimately, if you can see your flaws as, you know, the cracks as golden cracks, if you can see that power, if you can take those horrible things that have happened to you and make them meaningful in a positive way, I'm going to teach my kids how to not be as screwed up as I am. It can be as simple as that. That's going to get you out of the hole. That motivation, that's the first step. Then you just keep going. Obviously I have 3 daughters because I'm about to quote Frozen. But we were joking about this in one of the men's groups the other day. I think it's Frozen 2, doesn't really matter. Just do the next right thing. There's a song about just do the next right thing. And your daughters are grown. My youngest just turned 5. So, you know, we watched Frozen plenty of times, but there's some deep truth in that. Just do the next right thing. One step at a time, and just remember that your cracks are your source of your greatest value.
You know, I love that. And, you know, when you say that one of the first things was telling yourself that you love yourself, you know, I stumbled onto something just in the last 24 hours that talked about, and now this is a little bit of advice for fathers for if they have daughters. And I'll share this with you. Is a guy had asked his friend who was like this player, you know, and says like, man, you get all these goals and so forth. Let me ask you a question. He says, how do I get my daughter to stay away from you? He says, oh, he says, I have the answer. Tell them you love them. He says, because guys like us we look for girls with daddy issues, you know, the players, and they look for girls and you can spot them a mile apart. He says, but just telling them you love them, that's going to teach them their self-worth. And I thought that was just powerful because when you talk about, you know, telling, you know, part of your journey was telling yourself that you love yourself, you know, but it also resonates with us telling our kids that that we love them, you know, because it just creates this almost like this shield or this armor to let them know that you are loved, you know. And I just like I said, that just kind of came to mind. You know, I know it's totally off topic, but just because you talk about how we talk about giving self-love to ourselves, but it's important to also continue to remind our kids that we love them, even when they don't want to hear it, even when they're adults. Remind them.
Absolutely. Have you talked about the statistics on the I call it the statistics on the importance of girl dads? Let me run through this real quick and stop me if you've talked about this on the show before. But I did some research into this. You've shared you have 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters. I also have a son. I think all of this is true for sons as well, but especially true for daughters, to your point. And if you want to know the sources, I can list off all the sources. But um, dad or daughters with supportive fathers or close relationships to their father, whatever you want to phrase it as, they have better emotional health. This has all been scientifically proven. Studies that have proven this. Better emotional health, higher quality of life, higher self-esteem, higher confidence, improved ability to handle stress, better relationships as adults with men, lower risk of depression, lower risk of anxiety, lower likelihood of substance abuse, lower likelihood of early sexual activity. Like, the list goes on and on and on. And I think this is, I don't want to say equally true for sons, but also true for sons. But dads to their daughters often feel like, I don't get this girl stuff. How important can I be? You are incredibly important, like incredibly important, to the point that science can prove it at this point, right? And so I always like to remember those statistics, and how important we are to our daughters, to your point.
It's funny because I wasn't a girl dad, and that's one regret that I have. So my youngest just had a daughter, and a first grandchild, and so I'm going to be a girl dad slash. Well, it's not allowed to call me grandpa, so I say Larry. Like Larry the Lobster from SpongeBob. So I'm still working on that grandpa. But man, I look back and miss out on what was wrong with the girls painting my nails, with them wanting to put makeup on me, and I look at all these stories on social media and like, man, I missed out on all these opportunities, and I would get angry about it, because it was that ego and pride. It was that masculine that, oh no, men don't wear makeup. Men don't, like I said, it's your girls, so that's something I'm having to now, feeling the consequences now that they're adults, and which, we've started the process of healing just in the last couple of years. And having these real conversations, and now being able to share that vulnerability of like, I didn't know any better, but a lot of it was just I got sucked into what society wanted a man to look like, what in my mind, based on my upbringing. And I'm 100% all for, dads need to be girl dads. Dad need to show, a dad is the first, male figure that a daughter sees, and it's your first love, and you want to protect them. And I look back and go like, man, I was a bully. Trying to raise strong, independent girls, but in the process, I gave them PTSD, and not even realize it. It wasn't physical abuse. It was emotional, psychological. You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to show emotions. You can't go to therapy. That's a weakness. And, so just for you fathers that are just raising your kids in this very masculine, just know that you may think you're trying to protect them in this world that we live in, but you're absolutely doing the opposite, so, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. We started off with the question, are you the hero in your family's story, or are you the villain? I'll give you another question that really hit me hard at one point, and it was, would you be happy if your daughters married a man like you? And my answer, like without even needing to think about it, was an emphatic no at that point. Now, I'm getting closer. I have high standards, right? We have high standards for our daughters. So I'm getting closer. And you said something about not being able to feel emotions. That has been such a struggle for me, because I think, well, there's all kinds of reasons, but let me just share. I've worked so hard on changing this, because the word that I want to come to mind when my daughters think of me, it strangely, it may not feel masculine, right? But it's gentle with an undertone of, don't fuck with my dad. he'll end you, but gentle with them. And it comes back to emotions. And I needed to figure out how to handle my daughter's emotions, because what I would try and do is similar to what you're saying, is shut them down. I think this is equally true for sons, especially young sons, but I needed my daughters to teach me this. I think all of my kids have taught me different things. My son has, interestingly enough, the lesson he was sent here to teach me was how to love myself. because I see so much of myself in him, and I've damaged that relationship because it's easier to pick on myself when it's external than turn the look inside. But with daughters and emotions, so if anybody's struggling with their daughters' emotions, I think so many men listening can relate to what you just said. I get it. I get that struggle. You get that struggle, but the answer is let her feel those emotions. I've found the only thing harder than dealing with my daughter's emotions is like sitting here and letting her feel them, watching her be in that pain, like anger, sadness, whatever it is. But that's exactly what she needs from me. She doesn't need me to shame her, doesn't need me to get mad at her. She doesn't need me to withhold love because she's upset or mad or yelling at me. She doesn't need me to fix the problem and rescue her. She just needs me to let her feel it, let her talk, let her vent, maybe sometimes cry. Because what it comes down to is how we handle our daughter's emotions now is how she's going to look for the future men in her life to handle her emotions. And it
Mm.
comes back to this question: would you be proud if the man she marries handles her emotions the way that you do? Would you be proud if she married a man like you? And so what I need to do, what dads need to do, is we don't need to like her emotions. We don't need to let her get away with murder. I have a daughter who likes to scream at me and blame everything on me. It's like, no, I don't let her walk all over me. I need to show my daughters that their emotions can't knock me off balance, that I'm going to be calm and loving no matter what she feels. Maybe sometimes I need to draw a boundary, but I'm still calm and I'm still loving. Sometimes I handle it horribly. My wife will attest to that. But I'm trying to show her what a man loving her through her emotions look like, not what a man who shuts her down if she feels something he doesn't like looks like. And so that would be my advice to girl dads is in a nutshell, let her feel her emotions, but treat her emotions the way you want her future husband to treat her emotions. And I guarantee you that's not shut them down.
No, I love that advice. And, as we go into dynamics as your girls get older, the dynamic shifts completely. And the one thing that has helped me on my journey is, as I continue to battle with this ego, because ego can definitely get in the way of
Yeah.
your relationships, not only with your wives, friends, families, even your kids. But the one thing I've learned is when now that I've been on this journey for a few years, is when I make a mistake and I let my ego or pride get in the way and I want to exert that parent card or, because I said so, quick now to recognize what I did, and then I'm quick to correct it. Now they may not be ready to receive it at the time because now, my girls are adults now and they may not receive it as quick, but by recognizing it and not letting it brew, it seems like we can heal a lot faster. So these spats that we have
Absolutely.
every once in a while, they're shorter. Instead of there being, 3, 4, 5, sometimes a week long. Now, usually we can turn it around in about a day or two. And it goes back to, like you said, giving them that safe container to be able to express themselves, whether they're young or older. It's universal. It's just a
Yeah.
safe place. And then learning to just shut up and listen, because that's
Absolutely.
what I struggle with is I want to be so quick to go in and have the last word, but it's like sometimes you have to realize that your children are your greatest teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Yeah.
sooner you realize that, the sooner things get easier. Yeah.
Absolutely. I struggle with that too. I will admit that some of my greatest accomplishments have just been keeping my mouth shut. And I'll give you this phrase, maybe this will be helpful for you or some of the guys listening. I use this with my wife, I use this with my son, I use this with my daughter, so it applies anywhere. I love you more than I need to be right. I don't I don't say it out loud, okay? That'd be a little condescending, might actually create a fight. But, if my daughters are if I'm struggling with their emotions, if my son and I are butting heads, if my wife and I are about like, no, you said this. And I was like, I didn't say that. She's like, yeah, you did say that. And it's like, okay. I say it to myself. I love you more than I need to be right. It's that ego check. Check the ego at the door, right? I love you more than I need to be right. This argument is not gonna matter in 10 years, never mind 10 minutes. And ultimately that's what it comes down to. I actually imagine sometimes an eject button. So like in a James Bond car where he would have an eject button to eject the guy in the passenger seat, or like even like a fighter jet. In my head, I will slam my hand down on the eject button and kind of imagine myself shooting out, and then oftentimes I have to physically walk away. But yeah, just sometimes you just need to shut up. Daughters, wives, sons, whatever it is, sometimes you just need to shut up.
And I'll even take it a step further because it triggered a memory. Something that I've learned too, especially when you're dealing with their mom, and they want to come and then they want to start venting about things that are going on with the kids. Something that's helped me. So this is a tip that I'll share that's helping me on this journey, is being okay to say, you know what, my container's full. Like you've said enough. Let me just have some time to process, and then we can come back to the conversation. Because what I'm learning is, we live in this world of instant gratification. Everything's immediate. You want answers to something, you can go to AI, you can go to the computer, you can pull things up. So our kids are growing up this world of instant. They want answers now. They want things resolved now. And so we fall into that pattern. And what I've realized is not everything is a quick fix solution. Sometimes it takes just sitting back, and sometimes it takes listening to their mom and what's going on, but then also listening to the kids, because sometimes things can get convoluted in the process and emotions trigger and so forth. So I've learned that when my cup is full, I'm quick now, whether it's with my children or even just in friendships, whatever. It's like, hey, you know what? Let's pause this conversation and let's pick it up, and that's
Yeah.
helped tremendously,
Yeah.
because instead of just ingesting it and then I get sucked in emotionally and psychologically, and then it turns out being a shit show, and it's like, why can I just avoid this?
That's
So
great advice. It's like, it's actually better. You get into this when you talk about like self-care or taking time for yourself. And so many dads look at fatherhood as like, or even husbands will look at the marriage as like sacrificial. I need to sacrifice for my family. Yeah, we do, for sure. Sometimes it's also okay to say, no, I got to take care of myself first. Not as an overall pattern, right? Like you don't want to be a selfish dad where you don't take care of the family or anything like that. Your wife's the only one doing anything, but it's actually, it feels somewhat selfish for you to say, my container's full, pause this. But in the end, it's actually better for your relationship and your parenting. And so I keep coming back to this idea: what's best for the relationship is not always what's most convenient. What's best for the kids is not always what's most convenient for them, for you, for the mom, whatever it might be. And so she may not like you saying that, like, hold on, my container's full. She's like, but I'm still going. I want to finish. She may not like that, but in the end, what's the alternative? So you sit there and you listen to her, and then you start to lose your patience, and now you guys chip at each other. Or you tune it out because you can't handle it anymore. And then she notices that and she's like, wait, why aren't you listening to me anymore? Or you take her emotion onto you, you get worked up and you go and you yell at the kids, like you said, without asking them what's going on. All of the alternatives are actually less desirable than you doing what might feel like a selfish thing to say and say, hold on, I can't handle this right now. I got enough. Like, give me a minute. So in the end, it's not actually selfish. It's actually better for the relationship and better for the kids. So I love that advice. That's great advice.
no, and just kind of latching on to what you just said, what I've realized now, and you just helped me realize it, is that by taking a pause, it actually has stopped a lot of the fights that I do have.
Yep.
Instead of like it's just, and then now I'm reacting, and there's just reaction going back and forth. So yeah, it can be healthy.
That's funny. At least sometimes they figure it out on their own too. I had a moment like that this morning. We homeschool our kids. I actually spent 3 years as a high school teacher right out of college, and then when I met my wife and we had kids, we decided to homeschool. And we do like very minimal school through the summer. But my daughter was doing some math work this morning, and she's like, "Okay, what pages do I need to do?" And I was like, "This page, this page, this page." And went upstairs to get changed and get ready to leave for an appointment. And she followed me upstairs like 10 seconds later, was like, I need help. I was like, you can't possibly need help right away. You haven't even tried. She's like, no, I tried. I need help. I was like, okay, skip that problem. Go to the next one. I'll be down in a couple minutes once I'm ready. Similar to what you're saying, possibly feeling selfish might feel like a selfish answer. By the time I got downstairs, she'd figured out the problem. And it was like, I really wanted to say, I told you so. I told you so. But again, I love you more than I need to be right. And I just kind of let it go. But sometimes, back to teacher and bodyguard, right? Sometimes we need to let them struggle with either a math problem or metaphorically something else, until they figure it out. My wife has pushed me to accept this in terms of conflict between kids. And I'm quick to go in and be like, guys, knock it off. Stop yelling at each other. And she will sometimes grab me or kind of motion me from across the room and say, just give them a minute. Let's see what happens. Luckily it's girls, so there's not punches being thrown, right? But just give it a minute and let's see what happens. And sometimes we still need to step in, but a lot of times they learn how to express themselves in a conflict with someone that they love. And that's a skill that they need to learn when they get older, because I'll tell you, I had no clue how to express myself in a conflict with someone I loved. I just smashed into them metaphorically, verbally, and tried to beat them into submission. That's not how you treat someone you love. That's not how you treat your wife, trying to beat her into submission in an argument. Definitely not physically, just verbally. And so they need to learn how to do that. They need to learn how to deal with relational conflict, or just with friends. How do I disagree with a friend without creating a huge issue? That is one skill that everyone in our country right now can agree we are missing as a country, is the ability to disagree and have a conversation about that disagreement without it turning into essentially violence. So we gotta let them struggle sometimes too, and they'll figure it out.
No, absolutely. Let me ask you, when you had this breakdown and then you had just read the book the day before, so one of the first things you did is you reminded yourself that you loved yourself and so forth. But how did that look like when you showed up now with your wife and so forth? Because now it's kind of all built up, and then it just kind of exploded. And then even with the kids, even if they're little, like, how did that look like as you started this journey for, I'm going to say redemption? Maybe that's not the right word, but it's the only word that comes to mind, to just start the process of healing yourself.
Yeah. So it was painfully slow. That's something that my wife and I have talked about for so long, is we want to move so much quicker. And it was not in a straight line. So we had this visual hanging on our fridge for a long time, but it's an image of a straight line running from the bottom left pointing to the top right. Okay, so a line increasing as it goes across the page, and it says what people think success looks like. And then next to it, it's got this giant squiggly mess of a line with a little arrow on the top of it, and it says what success actually looks like. And you apply that to parenting, growth in parenting, growth in your relationship, growth as a man, growth in any career, anything. And it was incredibly accurate for the journey. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. And I think that I forget who wrote it. There was a book written called something like The Gap and the Gain. And it talked about this concept. I wish I had read it back when this happened. Because what so many people tend to do is they tend to focus on the gap, which is how much further they have left to go. The gap between where they are now and where they want to be. And they ignore the gain, where they've come from compared to where they are now. And because they ignore the gain, how far they've come, all they see is the gap, how far they have left to go, it feels like they're not moving. And I've had multiple conversations in the past week with guys who feel like they're in the exact same position that they were a year ago. And I have to kind of reality check them. And I wish somebody would have done this for me in my journey, and tell them, no, you're not. Like, you're dealing with some of the same problems, but like, look at your awareness. Look at this. Look at the growth here. Look at this. And they're only looking at the gap instead of the gain. And so it was a long and slow journey for me. That telling myself I love myself over and over again, that it didn't magically produce results overnight. I'm so thankful for the patience that my wife showed me, because, like I said, she was ready to be done, but she also saw me break. And in the moment of breaking, we were actually in a yelling argument at the top of the stairs outside of a bathroom on the second floor. And it hit me so hard mentally that I kind of collapsed mid-sentence down to my butt on the floor and started sobbing. And to her credit, she's mad, she's yelling at me in the argument. To her credit, after about 5 seconds, she was on the floor next to me hugging me. And I think that it must have been incredibly hard for her to be patient with me. Now she's was not perfect, still is not perfect, has thrown plenty of hand grenades into our relationship, right? And will be the first to admit it. But I needed that patience, and I think I needed her patient with me to learn how to be patient with myself too. Because what that looked like was, starting with books, podcast courses, trying to learn things, take those things that I learned and implement them, continue to screw up, continue to fall into my emotions, continue to snap at my kids, snap at my wife, and feel like I'm taking 2 steps back, but just keep, back to Frozen, keep doing the next right thing, keep trying again. A phrase that we use in our house is showing up at the table again and again and again. And just persistence became my word. Persistence. I will persist until I succeed. Is a line from an amazing book called The Greatest Salesman in the World. That was the kind of attitude that I needed to take into this. And like I said, started with trying to hide, started with trying to do this work behind the scenes on myself. And eventually what I needed was outside help, was turning to other men to help me, coaches and men's groups. And like I said, that was 6 or 7 years ago. I'm still struggling with things. We will still fall into similar patterns in my relationship. I will still snap at my kids sometimes. But if I look at the gain instead of the gap, if I look at the gain, I have dug myself out of that hole, and, I spend my days trying to help other guys do that, which, as you, I'm sure, experience, the amount of, it's certainly fulfilling to help other people, but the amount of knowledge and growth that I experience from helping other people, it's almost selfish in a way, right? I grow so much by helping other people. And so, I would encourage people listening who have been on this journey to look for ways to help other men who are on the journey too. And maybe they're at a same spot. They just need same spot as you and just need some encouragement. Or maybe they're a step behind you and you can share some of your wisdom. Or maybe, it's a completely different situation. I don't know, but you're going to gain from helping other men. You're going to gain from accepting help from other men, but you're also going to gain from helping other men. And I think that was a huge turning point. You're asking about what it looked like. That was a huge turning point for me. My growth accelerated when I started talking to other guys about it. And then it accelerated again when I started helping other guys who were a step or two behind me and sharing these hard-earned lessons. Because then I was talking about them more. And it also did something really interesting. When I started posting on Instagram, my accountability went way up. Because if I'm out here saying, okay, guys, here's what you do when your kids screaming bloody murder at you and you want to just yell at them to shut up. When I taught that publicly, especially, I had to turn around and actually do it. And so, it completely upped my accountability. And, there were even some times where my wife would call me out and she'd be like, you posted a reel on Instagram about how you talk to your wife when you're upset with her, but here you are yelling at me again. Okay. And it was a little bit of a needle, but it was also very true. And I was like, shit, you got me. And I didn't want to hear it, but I was like, okay. And so it's that accountability piece. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I kind of went all over the place with that answer, but yeah, that was a little bit of what it looked like.
No, it definitely did. Let me ask you, as we start to wind down, which has been a very powerful interview, have you taken your kids to see Inside Out?
Yes, I have. Yeah. We just took them to the drive-in actually to see Inside Out 2. And it was a great experience just to take our kids to a drive-in, but also to have those conversations about emotions. Is there's so many nuggets for adults in that movie.
So just on your journey with, your process of healing and rebuilding and so forth, what's something that stood out for you with that movie that just got you to explore that inner child and all the thing? Because I truly feel that all this that we're going through, it's our inner child, and
Absolutely.
it, you know, and it's now our outer child is acting out. But what's something you take from that movie that you're just like, man, this is something that contributed to my breakdown and then being a phoenix and rising from the ashes? What would be
Yeah.
something that stood out for you, an emotion or a part?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so I'm gonna this is a little bit of my personality. I am an outside of the box, d- don't tell me what I need to do kind of attitude. So I'm gonna give you an outside the box answer. I would say it's not specifically an emotion or a part of the movie. It's more of a perspective going into it. So we went to the movie thinking this is gonna be great for our kids. We're gonna be able to talk about emotions with them. It's gonna be a great time period, but like it's not going to just be a useless movie where they're just entertained for a couple hours. We're going to be able to teach, right? And what happened was went in thinking this was for the kids, and then to your point, came out thinking, oh my goodness, most of that was for me. And it's kind of a metaphor for how I view parenting. And I'll share this concept with you. It highlighted this thing that I need to keep coming back to, which is um I think it's a Frederick Douglass quote, something like it's easier to build strong children than repair broken men. And
Mm.
to me, what that means is build my kids up strong now so that they aren't broken men, because my job is to repair myself, who I am a broken man, and to help other broken men repair themselves. And that's much harder. So let's get this done up front. But what we need to do before we can teach our children to be strong men and women, raise strong children, what I realized is to be the dad that my kids need, I first needed to be the dad that I always needed for myself. And that doesn't mean my dad was a terrible dad, but there were things that I needed that I didn't get. And inner child in me right now, because I agree, this is, we all throw adult temper tantrums. It's our inner child throwing a temper tantrum. I need to parent myself. I need to reparent myself. And in order to be able to parent my kids the way that they need. And so Inside Out 2 is a reminder of that. You go in thinking you're going to parent your kids, and you come out thinking, well, the way I parent my kids is by reparenting myself. Instead of
Awesome.
talking to them about emotions, which I still need to do, I need to handle my emotions. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I had from that movie, is just that reminder. Keep reparenting yourself, because you need to be that parent for yourself before you can be the parent that your kids need.
Yeah, I honestly feel that movie was for the parents, and it's a way of starting to change how we parent in society.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very well orchestrated. So, closing thoughts. It's been a pleasure. What are your closing thoughts with today's podcast?
Mm. I mean, there's so many directions that I can go to. I think that what's on my mind right now is just since this is fathers who are listening, um, a reminder that our kids are spotlights shining on our deepest wounds, and that's a gift. So like in different ways, each of my four kids has done this differently, but they're forever finding the most sensitive wounds and flaws and perfectly pushing my buttons to trigger me into, as you said, that little inner child coming out screaming. And I think that that's the beautiful gift. Back to like this, kintsugi, the golden cracks. They are showing me, back to what I just said about reparenting myself, they're showing me exactly where I need to reparent myself. And so when you struggle with your kids, if a kid is talking back to you, instead of, obviously you don't want to fly off the handle and scream at them, go to your room, you're grounded, I'm taking away the iPad, whatever it is. Once you get out of that immediate reaction, getting really curious why that triggered you so much. Perfect example for me, because when my kids argue about something I tell them, or also like just completely ignore me, Like, just keep playing like I'm not talking to them, or like, yes, dad, and then don't do what I asked. It triggers me so deeply because as a kid, I felt like I wasn't listened to. I'm middle of three boys. And so I had middle child syndrome, right? Like martyr to the world kind of thing.
Mhm.
The first kid's always the favorite. The baby is the baby. And I'm here stuck in the middle. Poor me. Nobody listens to me. Sometimes it was true. Sometimes it was made up. But that it triggers that in me. And my kids are, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be listening to me. Sometimes they shouldn't be, because sometimes I'm just spewing nonsense, right? But when I get triggered by that behavior, it's shining a spotlight on my wound. And I need to handle them gently but firmly. And then I need to go get curious about why that bothered me so much. Even the things that are things that kids shouldn't be doing, right? So like if you're normally a very calm father, but when your kids fight, you lose it. Well, why? Why is that so? Why does that affect you so much? Get curious about that and look for how they are rubbing salt in your wounds, how they are perfectly, because I think this is true for most dads. Your kids will perfectly push your buttons to get you to grow where you need to grow. And so I think that would be kind of like parting thoughts, is just keeping that in mind and being curious why certain things get you so much that your kids do, why you struggle with this or that, or why it triggers you so much, sends you into such a rage, or upsets you so much. And then just doing work on that. Curiosity alone is great, but then doing work on that is where I guess I would leave them.
Thank you for those closing thoughts. What a beautiful session today to just share your journey and just to see where you just got to that point, just a breaking point, and then just a process of starting your journey of healing, and then just the success you're having. And then from that, being able to help other men, coach fathers on how to be heroes in their family. So that's a wrap for Fatherhood Voices. And thank you so much, Locke Hammond, for joining us.
Thank you so much.